Clara's office in that pharmaceutical multinational occupied the northeast corner of the 20th floor, with panoramic views of a city that never rested. The glass walls reflected the evening light, tinting the perfectly ordered reports on her walnut desk with gold. From the outside, anyone could admire the picture of efficiency and control. The youngest product development director in the company's history, impeccably dressed in a pearl gray suit, reviewing data with surgical precision. No one would see the almost imperceptible trembling of her hands, nor hear the constant buzzing in her ears that had been tormenting her for the past few weeks. Much less would they imagine that behind that facade of determination was a woman who had forgotten the last time she made a decision based solely on her desire and not on what was expected of her. "The board is waiting, Clara." Her assistant, Miguel's voice, brought her back to reality. "Are you feeling all right? You look a bit pale." "Perfectly fine," she responded with that tone of confidence rehearsed over years. "I have the reviewed reports and projections for the next quarter. Thank you, Miguel." The young man nodded and returned to his post while Clara gathered the necessary documents for the meeting. 17 years at that company. 17 years of invisible sacrifices, of missed birthdays, of vacations interrupted by urgent calls, of personal relationships sacrificed on the altar of professional success. And now, facing the most important promotion of her career, all she could feel was a terrifying emptiness. The boardroom was at the end of the hallway, an intimidating space dominated by a black marble oval table where 12 people awaited her. Presentation. Among them was Ernesto Valdez, the CEO, a 62-year-old man known as much for his strategic brilliance as for his ruthless way of achieving results. He had been her mentor, or at least that's what Clara had repeated to herself to justify the countless extra hours, the lost weekends, the occasionally inappropriate comments she had learned to ignore in the name of pragmatism. "Clara, right on." "Time," Ernesto greeted with that smile that never reached his eyes. "We were just discussing the excellent results of the latest launch. Your team has exceeded all expectations." It wasn't your team, Clara thought. It was she who had spent months perfecting every detail, analyzing data until dawn, recruiting the right staff despite budget cuts. But she nodded with professional modesty as she took her seat and connected her presentation to the system. "Thank you, Ernesto, but the credit is shared," she responded automatically. Without the support of management, it would have been impossible to achieve these numbers. The meeting proceeded like so many others, ascending graphs, optimistic forecasts, ambitious strategies. Clara presented with the precision and clarity that characterized her. She answered questions with concrete data and anticipated objections with solutions already developed. A perfect performance that earned her approving nods and occasional looks of admiration from the younger members of the board. It was during the explanation of the expansion plan for the star medication when it happened. A simple comment from Ernesto, almost casual. "By the way, we've decided to advance the launch to the Asian market. Investors are impatient, and we have a window of opportunity before the competition." Clara felt the air becoming dense, almost unbreathable. She knew the data on the latest phase of trials in Asian patients perfectly. She knew that preliminary results showed a slightly higher incidence of side effects in certain demographic groups. Nothing alarming, nothing that couldn't be explained with dosage adjustments, but data that required more research before a massive launch. "Ernesto, the reports from the clinical department suggest waiting at least 3 more months," she said, with a firm but respectful voice. "There are patterns we need to confirm before—" "Clinical reports are just recommendations," he interrupted with that condescending tone he reserved for the rare occasions when someone questioned his decisions. "The legal department has already evaluated the risks. They're minimal compared to the benefits of being first in that market." Clara felt all eyes fixed on her. 17 years building a reputation for efficiency and loyalty. 17 years proving she was a team player. And now, in seconds, she had to decide between maintaining that image or defending what she knew was right. The data show a pattern of hepatic reactions in patients with a certain genetic profile, more common in Asian populations. she insisted, opening a specific page of her report. They're not serious cases, but if we multiply by millions of potential users, Clara, Ernesto's tone hardened. I understand your concern. It's admirable. But this decision has already been made. Shareholders are expecting the announcement next week. The message was clear. Objection registered and dismissed. The meeting continued as if that exchange had never occurred. Clara completed her presentation professionally, answered additional questions, and received congratulations for her work. No one mentioned the elephant in the room. No one questioned the CEO's decision. No one except her seemed to remember that behind the graphs and financial projections were real people who would trust that medication. At the end of the day, Clara collected her things with mechanical movements. The office had emptied hours ago, and only the security guards remained, making their usual rounds. She paused in front of the huge window, observing the lights of the city that never sleeps. 17 years watching that skyline grow, gradually changing as she herself had changed, becoming more imposing, more efficient, but also colder and more distant. Her phone vibrated with a message from Ernesto. Excellent work today. The promotion is yours. We'll celebrate tomorrow, dinner at 8. I reserved at Artemisa. It wasn't even a question. It was a statement, one more expectation. Another space where her real voice would be silenced under layers of professional courtesy and corporate pragmatism. Clara put away the phone without responding and made a decision that would change the course of her life. Instead of heading to the elevator that would take her to the underground parking where her BMW waited, she turned to the opposite side, toward the rarely used emergency staircase. She needed to feel the physical effort, the burning in her muscles. After descending 20 floors, something real to counteract the unreality of her perfectly programmed existence. As she descended step by step, thoughts crowded her mind. At what point had she allowed her life to become this? When had she begun to confuse professional recognition with personal fulfillment? Was the price she was paying for this type of success worth it? Upon reaching the ground floor, instead of heading to the main exit, Clara opted for a side door that led to a less busy street. She needed air, she needed space. She needed something she couldn't name but felt painfully absent in her life. She walked with no defined direction through increasingly unfamiliar streets. The nocturnal city showed a face she rarely saw. Small family restaurants with laughter escaping through the windows. Couples walking unhurriedly. Street musicians playing melodies that spoke of lives completely different from her own. She stopped. In front of one of them, an older man playing a cello with his eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music he was creating. Clara remained there for several minutes, feeling how something inside her, something long dormant, was slowly beginning to awaken. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was her mother. Dinner on Sunday. Your father wants to tell you about the new investment he's considering. He says you could advise him. Another expectation, another demand on her time and energy. Clara loved her parents, but even that relationship had become an extension of her professional identity. She was no longer simply their daughter. She was the expert, the informal consultant, the source of pride for her material achievements. She put the phone away again without responding and continued walking until she found herself in front of a small bookstore that remained open despite the hour. The display window showed an eclectic selection of titles, none related to business management, leadership, or professional development, the only books she had read in recent years. Driven by an impulse she didn't bother to analyze, she entered. A bell announced her arrival, but the only person present, a woman of about 70 with thick-framed glasses and silver hair gathered in a careless bun, barely looked up from the book she was reading behind the counter. We close in half an hour, she said simply, without hostility, but also without the commercial enthusiasm Clara was accustomed to. I'm just looking, she responded, feeling strangely liberated by the woman's indifference. She ventured between the shelves, running her fingers over spines that promised stories, ideas, and worlds completely foreign to the metrics, algorithms, and strategies that occupied her days. She stopped in front of a section dedicated to travel literature. She took a volume at random. Roads Less Traveled, a sabbatical year on the Mediterranean coast. She opened it to a random page and read, "There are silences that teach more than 1,000 conversations." The silence of the sea at dawn revealed truths to me that I had been avoiding for decades. Sometimes we need to move away from all familiar voices to finally hear our own. Something broke inside Clara. It wasn't a dramatic cry or a spectacular revelation. It was more like when a small crack in a dam finally yields under the constant pressure of water. She bought the book almost reflexively and went out into the night again, this time with a direction in mind. Instead of returning to her apartment in the exclusive financial district, Clara headed to the train station. She didn't have a plan, just an urgent need for distance. She bought a ticket for the first train leaving the city, regardless of the destination. It turned out to be a regional train departing in 20 minutes toward the coast, a 3-hour journey that she would normally consider an unacceptable waste of time. While waiting on the almost deserted platform, she checked her bag. She had the essentials: documentation, credit cards, the phone she decided to turn off, and now this unexpected book. Nothing more. No change of clothes, no toiletry bag, not the tablet loaded with pending reports. For the first time in years, she was traveling light. The train arrived punctually, half empty at that late hour. Clara chose a window seat and observed how the city began to recede, first slowly, and then at increasing speed, until it became a blurred set of lights that were left behind. With each kilometer traveled, she felt a knot loosening in her chest that she didn't even know she had been carrying. She opened the book and began to read about places she had never visited and ways of life she had never considered, about people who had abandoned promising careers to pursue forgotten passions, about unexpected encounters that had changed destinies, about the simple but profound joy of living at a pace dictated by the sun and tides instead of the clock and corporate calendar. When the train finally reached its destination, a small coastal town immersed in nocturnal silence, Clara descended like someone stepping onto unknown terrain, cautious but determined. The salty air greeted her, along with the distant but unmistakable sound of waves breaking against the shore. She found a small hotel near the station. Nothing luxurious, nothing comparable to the 5-star establishments she frequented on business trips, but clean and welcoming. The receptionist, a young woman with a local accent, assigned her a simple room with a balcony facing the sea. "How many nights will you be staying, ma'am?" The question caught Clara off guard. She hadn't thought about it. She hadn't planned anything beyond this impulse to escape. "I'm not sure," she answered honestly. "Can I decide day by day?" The young woman smiled, a genuine gesture without the calculated professionalism Clara was accustomed to. "Of course. Things are more relaxed here, especially now that the high season has ended. Stay as long as you need." As long as you need. A strange concept for someone whose life had been marked by deadlines, objectives, and others' expectations. Clara didn't know how long she would need, nor was she even sure what exactly she was looking for. She only knew that she couldn't return, not yet, not without having found something she had lost somewhere along the way. That night she slept with the balcony slightly open, letting the murmur of the sea and the salty air fill the room. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she didn't set an alarm. She didn't check her email before going to bed. She didn't mentally plan the next day. She simply surrendered to rest with a new and strangely comforting sensation, the freedom of not having to answer to anyone but herself, at least for a while. And so, in an anonymous room of a small coastal hotel, the transformation of Clara Montero truly began. Not with grand declarations or dramatic decisions, but with the simple act of allowing herself to listen to the silence and discover what it had to tell her. Dawn arrived with a clarity that Clara had forgotten existed, without automatic blinds, filtering the light, without the constant hum of central air conditioning, without digital notifications interrupting the last moments of sleep. Just the natural light gradually growing, the rhythmic sound of the waves and the occasional cry of a seagull. She rose slowly, disoriented for an instant before remembering where she was, and more importantly, why. On the bedside table, her phone remained turned off, a sight so unusual it was almost disturbing. 17 years building a life in which being inaccessible for 8 hours was unthinkable, and now she had been completely disconnected from the world for more than 12. Clara got up and went out onto the small balcony. The coastal town was beginning to wake up with a tranquility that radically contrasted with the frantic urban rhythm she was accustomed to. Fishermen returning with the morning catch, owners of small businesses raising shutters unhurriedly, a solitary runner on the promenade. A life that unfolded at a completely different pace. She decided to go down for breakfast in the small hotel dining room. The same young woman from the reception, now also serving as a waitress, offered her coffee and a selection of freshly baked bread with homemade jams. Nothing like the perfectly calculated protein breakfast she usually took while reviewing the first emails of the day. "First time in our town?" asked the young woman while serving the coffee. "Yes," Clara responded, surprised by her own desire to converse. "It was quite an impulsive decision to come here." "The best things are usually impulsive," smiled the girl. "My name is Martina, by the way. If you need recommendations or anything, just ask." "Clara," she introduced herself, finding it strange, not to add her position or company as she automatically used to do. "And thank you. I think I will need some suggestions. I don't have a plan." Martina seemed to find this perfectly normal, even advisable. "Then start there." She pointed toward the window, where a path could be seen descending toward a small cove. "The walk to Cala Serena. At this hour, it will be practically deserted. It's my favorite place to think." Clara thanked her for the suggestion and after a leisurely breakfast, headed toward the indicated path. She wasn't wearing appropriate clothing. For a hike, her flat city shoes and the casual outfit she had worn to the office the day before weren't ideal. But that, surprisingly, didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, she didn't have to impress anyone. She didn't have to project a specific image. She didn't have to play a role. The path descended gently among Mediterranean pines and aromatic scrub. The sun was already warming, but a constant breeze made the temperature perfect. Clara walked slowly, allowing herself something she had forgotten, to observe without purpose, without seeking data or conclusions, simply absorbing every detail of the landscape. A small lizard sunning itself on a rock, motionless until she passed too close. The contrast between the intense blue of the sea and the dark green of the pines. The mixed aroma of salt, dry earth, and wild rosemary. Small everyday miracles that she had stopped perceiving in her meticulously structured life. The cove appeared suddenly, after a bend in the path. A small crescent of light sand embraced by low cliffs, with crystalline waters in impossible gradients of blues and turquoises. Just as Martina had promised, it was completely deserted. Clara descended to the shore and sat on the sand, not caring that her clothes would get stained. She contemplated the horizon for what could have been minutes or hours, completely losing the notion of time that so governed her usual life. For the first time in years, she wasn't in a hurry. She had no pending meetings, calls to attend to, decisions to make. Just this moment, this silence, this view. Almost without realizing it, she began to cry. It wasn't a dramatic or heart-wrenching cry, but serene, as if finally releasing pressure accumulated for too long. Silent tears that fell down her cheeks while she continued to contemplate the sea, slowly recognizing all she had sacrificed in the name of success as others had defined it for her. Meaningful relationships indefinitely postponed. Abandoned passions. How long had it been since she had painted, read for pleasure, cooked something just because she felt like it? Simple moments of joy she had given up to be permanently available for work. The meticulous construction of a life that impressed everyone except the only person whose opinion should matter, herself. When the tears ceased, Clara felt strangely light, as if something she had been carrying for years had finally been deposited in the sand. She took off her shoes and walked to the shore, letting the cold water bathe her feet. A simple act she hadn't performed since… when? Since that last family trip when she was still a student more than 20 years ago? She remained in the cove for hours, alternating between moments of deep reflection and periods of blank mind, simply existing without purpose or justification. When she finally decided to return, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, tinting the landscape in golden tones. Back in the village, instead of returning directly to the hotel, Clara decided to wander the cobblestone streets of the small historic center. The whitewashed houses, the balconies full of geraniums, the small squares where elderly people played dominoes under the shade of century-old trees. A world that seemed to function with completely different rules than those that had governed her existence for so many years. She stopped in front of a small restaurant advertising fresh fish of the day. Her stomach reminded her that she hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. She entered and asked for the chef's recommendation, something she never did in the luxury restaurants she frequented, where she meticulously studied reviews and options in advance. They served her a local grilled fish with aromatic herbs and seasonal vegetables. Simple, unpretentious, but with a flavor that transported her to childhood memories, to summers at her grandmother's country house, to a time when food wasn't a nutritional obligation to fulfill while reviewing reports, but a pleasure to enjoy, with all the senses. She returned to the hotel when night had completely fallen. At the reception, Martina greeted her with familiarity. "How was Kayla Serena?" she asked while handing her the room key. "Exactly what I needed," Clara responded honestly. "Thank you for the recommendation. Anytime," and… She hesitated a moment before continuing. "They've called asking for you several times." The reality that Clara had kept at a distance all day returned suddenly. Of course they would have called. Her unexplained absence from the office would have triggered all kinds of alarms. "Did they leave any message?" she asked, feeling how the tension returned to her shoulders. "Just that it's urgent you get in touch," Martina responded with a worried expression. "They mentioned something about an important meeting and said he was your boss." Clara nodded, thanking her for the information. In her room, she contemplated the turned-off phone for a long time before making a decision. She turned it on briefly, just long enough to send 2 concise messages to Ernesto. "I need personal time. I'll be absent for a few days. I delegated urgent matters to Miguel. Sorry for the inconvenience." To her mother, "I'm fine. I need space. I'll be in touch soon. Don't worry." Then she turned the device off again, refusing to see the dozens of notifications, missed calls, and messages that she would undoubtedly have received. She knew it was an attitude that many would consider irresponsible, even childish. The Clara of 3 days ago would never have acted like this. But the Clara of now needed this space, this silence, this distance from all voices except her own. She went to bed again with the balcony slightly open, letting the sound of the sea lull her to sleep. Tomorrow she would have to start thinking about next steps, about real decisions for her future. But for tonight she allowed herself to simply rest, temporarily freed from the expectations that had defined her life for too long. The following days established a completely new rhythm for Clara. Leisurely breakfasts with light conversations with Martina or some other occasional guest. Long walks to different points of the coast, discovering hidden coves and natural viewpoints. Meals in small local restaurants where she ended up engaging in conversation with fishermen, artisans, and other temporary visitors like herself. Her phone remained mostly turned off, turning it on briefly every 2 days, only to confirm to her family that she was still fine and to ask for more time. The first responses were of concern and incomprehension, but gradually they began to respect her need for space. From Ernesto, she received messages that evolved from initial surprise. "What's going on, Clara? This isn't like you," to barely contained irritation. "The promotion can't wait indefinitely. We need an answer." And finally, cold acceptance. "Miguel is managing ongoing projects. When you decide to return, we'll talk." But the most surprising thing for Clara was discovering that, with each passing day, she cared less about Ernesto's opinion, the pending promotion, or even the projects she had left unfinished. As if a layer of her identity, one she had confused with her essence, was dissolving with each bath in the sea, with each authentic conversation, with each moment of contemplative silence. It was on one of those coastal walks when she met Gabriel, a man in his 50s painting watercolors at the top of a cliff. Clara had stopped at a certain distance, fascinated watching how he captured the changing light on the water, with seemingly simple but precise strokes.